Hello everyone. This is my mental health presentation of my life review. And I did my life review on my grandma, which is my mom's mom. So on my mom's side of the family, my grandma. So I'm just going to start out by giving a few descriptions of stage by stage, like the questions that I asked her and some of her answers throughout each of those like seasons of her life, to give you just kind of an overview of and a feel of like who my grandma is. And then after that, I'm just going to give you a few reflections of what I learned from doing this life review with my grandma. So to begin, my mom is Hispanic and my dad is American. So my mom's mom, my grandma, is also Hispanic. So she grew up in Mexico in a very Hispanic home, and as I described part of her childhood, one thing that she said when I talked to her about it was that she lived in a very lively home and a very seemingly happy home for the most part. Hispanic families are often very like tight knit, and so you often have like extended family and lots of family like all in your house, and you eat lots of good food together, and there's just a lot of love and liveliness oftentimes. So that's what my grandma experienced growing up. One of the things that she described as one of the harder parts of her childhood was that all growing up, her father struggled a lot with anger and with his temper, and with oftentimes almost being physically violent. And so that was one of the things that she described as the most difficult about her childhood, was that she and her two sisters and her mom were often afraid of her dad, and that it caused a lot of anxiety as a child for her to have to experience that. But some of the other things that she described about her childhood that were still good was that she always went to church as a child and as an adolescent. And you'll find this to be a theme throughout her whole life. My grandma loves the Lord a lot. And she explained that her mom was actually the first to become a Christian in her family, and that before they were Catholic, and so my grandma had gone to like a Christian revival and had like accepted Jesus, so they started going to like a Christian church instead of the Catholic church, which is very common in Hispanic culture in Mexico, the Catholic church. So her mom was the first to accept Christ, and she went to church all of her life. So then adolescence, I'll describe some of the things that she said about her adolescent years. So she described that when I asked who was the most influential person in her adult or her adolescent years, she said that it was her younger sister, the one that was right after her in age. So there were two younger sisters, but the one right after that was closest to her in age. And her name was Nancy, and they shared a room for most of their childhood. And she said it was her best friend, and Nancy was very like strong-willed and funny and smart, and they were really close friends and kind of comforted each other through a lot of the turbulence and just like trials in their home of their father being very angry all the time. And so she went to public school, and she actually met her husband there. They were high school sweethearts, and she would marry him later, but that's where she met him, and she described him very fondly there. And so she said that one of her other fond memories was going to church choir, that in her adolescent years she did church choir a lot, and that she really enjoyed that. And when I asked her about like provision in her home and like whether she lacked or anything like that, she said that that her father provided he had a steady job, but that he was very stingy, and so sometimes it was hard to have things that she needed just because she was afraid to ask her father, and he didn't always want to provide for his daughters. even though there was enough money to. And yeah, she just said that was the hardest thing about her adolescent years, was her father's anger. And then in her adulthood, the theme carries through that Christianity was very important to her, and that even in all her adult years, she loved the Lord and she went to church, and lots of women's Bible studies that she led, that she talked about. And she, in her early adult years, she went to college. And the one thing that she talked about going to college was that she was living at home still with her father and kind of their home situation, and that college was very stressful for her as well. And so those two things kind of at the same time caused her to develop vertigo in her inner ear, and she had to be hospitalized, and she's had that like the rest of her life. And so that was one thing that was kind of a regret for her, and something that was really sad, and yeah, that was just a really stressful part of her life, college. And she married her husband, my grandpa, after college. Grandpa, excuse me. My grandma married my grandpa after college. And I asked her, like, what, if she had any jobs or an occupation, or like what she did. And she explained that she was mostly a housewife all of her adult life, and that she mostly like raised my mom and her two sisters, and just kind of like cooked and cleaned and took care of her family. And she said it was very, very fulfilling for her, and that she really loved like taking care of her family and being a wife and a mother. And I asked her about marriage, and she explained that marriage is really, really hard, but that she really emphasized how it gets richer over time when you continue to like fight for your marriage and like choose the other person, and you strive to chase after God in your marriage. Then it was really fulfilling. That's what she felt. And then her most difficult loss during her adult years was the death of her mother, and she explained that was really hard for her and really sad for her. And so I asked her a few questions at the end, just like summarizing her life and looking back on her life. And she said that it was very fulfilling and satisfying, and she felt that the reason that her life was fulfilling and satisfying was because of God and because of the Lord, and because she had lived her life for the Lord. And I asked her if she would do anything differently, and she said she would live her life the same way over again. And that the only thing that she thinks that she might have done differently was stress less in college, and not cause health issues in her body. And also, just like my grandma has such a love for the Lord, and so her desire was that she would just get to know the Lord better. And that was the only thing that she could say was like a potential regret in her life. And she said her main satisfactions were her children and her family, and her most proud things in her life were her children's accomplishments. And I asked her what were the most important things in her life still today. And she said God, her husband, her children, and her grandchildren. So like family and God. So that's kind of a summary of my grandma and who she is. And she's really amazing, and really, really special to me and to our family. But I also wanted to just share some things that I learned as a result of this life study. And so one of the main things I learned was how important God is in our lives, and how important it is to live for Him in our lives, and how He can really bring beauty from ashes out of a lot of hard situations that my grandma went through in her life. Like the Lord brought her through, and her life was still fulfilling because like she lived for the Lord. And that was something that she really, really emphasized throughout all of my interview was, honey, like just live for the Lord. Like it is so important to just love Him and just follow His ways, and just love Him with all of your life, and chase after Him and live your life for Him, because that's the most fulfilling way to live your life. And the other thing was just, I think with all life reviews, just looking back, it's really beneficial so that you can kind of see like what how to live a life of no regrets. You know, like as a young person, we have so much life ahead of us, and so sometimes it's good to learn from older people, like how they've lived, what things they think are regrets, and just like learn from that and learn how you can live your life differently, or live your life in a way that you have no regrets. So I think those were the two main things that I learned, that gave me a lot of perspective, honestly, on what that I don't want to have a life of regrets, and I want to live for Jesus in my life. So that is my life review of my grandma. Thank you so much for listening.